The eighth gate. Holding together. The basic worth realized in contributing individual efforts to group goals. This is the theme that heads the hexagram. And it really is the deepest expression of what this gate of contribution is really all about. The eighth gate sits at the expressive head of an enormously powerful energy system. It begins down in the 60th gate, runs through the third gate, through the channel, the format of mutation, this pulse energy that drives individual mutation and creativity. It goes to the 14 and the 2, the keeper of the keys, the channel of the beat, this enormous power that exists within the 14th gate, this possession in great measure, this energy to drive our direction. Through the second gate, the driver, the gate of the receptive, the gate of our true direction in this life. And then that direction in this life directly expressed through the 1 and the 8. The first gate being the need of the self to express itself, but clearly to be able to see that the completion of this process, the expression in the throat, the eighth gate is a throat gate, and as a throat gate it speaks. It says, I can contribute or I cannot. I will contribute or I will not. I know I can contribute or I know I can't. The fundamental theme of the eighth gate is to make a contribution. But in making that contribution, this is not a collective or a tribal process. The contribution is not a matter of sharing. The contribution is not a matter of support. Contribution is thematically empowerment. And the contribution is made by example. Everything about the nature of the eighth gate is that it is of great value to the group as long as it is expressing its true nature. And of course this touches on one of the deepest themes in human design, is that to love yourself and to operate correctly as yourself is not, in fact, selfish, but it makes an enormous contribution to the well-being of the planet as a whole. And it makes an enormous contribution to your connection oracally with anyone that is there in your life. The 8-1, the channel 8-1, is a channel of inspiration, the creative role model, and the creative role model is always expressed through the eighth gate. In understanding any gate, it is always helpful to examine its first line, because it tells you so much. Remember that in the structure of the hexagram, the first line is the foundation, and as such, everything about the hexagram is built on that foundation. And the keynote of the first line of the 8 is honesty. And it is one of the most important themes that the 8 lives with in being able to hold together, in being able to make that contribution to the group as oneself. The ability to be able to empower others without losing one's own identity is rooted in honesty, and not honesty as we understand it in the sense of telling the truth, but being the truth. Being the truth. Now, what is often so difficult for the eighth gate is that the eighth gate, if you look at the channel 8-1 and you think of it in terms of type, what you're looking at is a projected element. And in that nature of that projection, there is a demand to be recognized as much as there is a gift of recognizing. If the group does not recognize the individual empowerment, then they cannot be empowered. And so it is part of the process of the eighth gate to stand up, to get that attention. And of course, most of the time that attention is limited to what is verbal, to what can be expressed through the throat center. Individuality always is accompanied by melancholy. It is, in fact, the other side of the chemistry of the muse that is the potential in the creative process of individuality. And that if the 8th gate is operating consistently through a defined throat, remember that is going to be very different than the 8th gate in an open throat that is going to be conditioned on the timing and on how and when it is going to express its potential uniqueness and empowerment to be a role model for the others. Possession in great measure. The 14th gate. In the traditional I Ching, this is the gate of the wagon. And it really is the archetypal material gate in the traditional I Ching. The wagon that can be filled up. The wagon that can be loaded up with goods, with great wealth in that sense. This is the potential of possession in great measure as a result. And yet, to really understand that what is possessed in this 14th gate is the most extraordinary energy of the sacral center. In other words, this is the gate of power skills, but more than that, this is a gate in which the ability to use energy correctly is the most important attribute of the gate. Because after all, this is the central column that runs through the middle of the body graph. This is the individual mutative directive column. And it is the 14th gate with this great power that has the unique capacity of being able to give us our direction in life by being the generative source of the energy for the second gate. The second gate, the gate of the driver, the receptive in the G center. Remember that the driver just drives. But in order for the driver to go anywhere, the driver needs to be able to put their foot on the accelerator and get access to the fuel and power to drive the vehicle. You know, the second gate without the 14th gate is the child sitting in the family car playing with the steering wheel. But the car isn't going anywhere. It's all about the 14th gate. And of course, the direction that you go in is directly related to the quality of the fuel that you receive. I mean, it's so interesting. You know, there was this cliche many years ago that came out of the hippie era about you are what you eat, this kind of thing. And like all things, the statements that are cliches or become cliches, there is always a quality of truth in them. For me, the most fascinating thing about fueling and about maintaining fuel is that it does change your direction in life. If you have an apartment complex, and in that apartment complex you have a vegetarian and you have an omnivore, you're going to see very clearly that the direction that they take in their life is actually going to be different. And I'm not talking about psychological differences, I'm talking about physical differences. They're going to shop in different places, as an example. They're not going to shop in the same place. They're not going to prefer the same kind of restaurants. In other words, there's going to be a different direction in their life simply because of the quality of fuel that they are producing. And it's one of the things to understand about the correctness of being. You know, to be correct is to be correct in all things. It's why that the only thing you can rely on is your strategy and your authority. Because there are so many different variations that exist within the nuances of anybody's design. And in order for the 14th gate to run correctly and provide this great power for direction, mutative direction in this life, that it has to be operating on a correct fuel. And that correct fuel can only be the byproduct of that being operating correctly as themselves. You know, the channel, the 214, is the channel of the beat. This is all about being able to be the keeper of the keys. And everything about the nature of the 14th gate, everything about direction in life, goes back to one of the most fundamental things in human design. It goes back to the very basis of type, of understanding that with the sacral center and dealing with the sacral center, if you have the 14th gate in a defined sacral center, that the solution for you in this life, the direction for you in this life is all so simple. All you need to do is respond. And in that responding, you will be correct in whatever direction that you take. Whatever fueling is part of your process. And the right fuel, operating correctly, leads to the right skills in the way in which one maneuvers through the direction. If you have the 14th gate in an undefined sacral center, you have to see the risk of being conditioned to fuel a direction that is not the right direction. And again, this goes back to you being you, not being homogenized into the conditioned forces, but being able to operate differentiated as yourself.
By having that experience and what it means for them, because it brings only uncertainty. Only uncertainty. By having that experience.